and we have some visitors slash guests tonight. So Tyler wanted us to go around quickly and give a brief introduction. I'll start. My name is Rebecca Camberling. I am the vice chair, and I don't know what else to say. So there we go.
I'll let you point out who's on your screens for introductions.
Oh, all right. Then I'm just going to go clockwise on mine. Chase, you're next.
Thank you. I'm Chase Landry. I work for the City of Beaverton in the Community Development Division.
Vanessa.
I am Anessa Vitko. I am Central Beaverton Old Town resident, past chair. That's all you need, right?
Cool.
Where do you work at?
I work for CTran, which is a public transportation agency for Vancouver, Washington. I did work for TriMet for 12 years. So.
And your residence is where?
Old Town.
Did you say that already? Oh, okay, sorry.
All right, Anne, you are next.
Hi, I'm Ann Snyder. I'm a resident of the Highland Hills neighborhood, member of URAC.
Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm a guest today, Rachel Thieme from the City of Beaverton. I work in the Economic Development Division, and I'm here to give you an update on our new initiative called the Downtown Equity Strategy.
Mr. Eric.
Eric Lear. I'm a Five Oaks Triple Creek resident.
And Kelly.
Hey, I'm Kelly Perkins. I work in CDD. I'm here to take the meeting, to record the meeting.
Andy.
I am Andy Ellen. I'm a Bose resident.
And Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob Zoeller. I'm an associate planner with the planning division. Been here about 3 years, and I'm here to give you an update on the Housing Options Project, which looks at how more middle housing types can be allowed in residential areas.
Thank you. Alan.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see everybody. Alan Kennedy with Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, representing special districts.
And Sarah Walton.
Hi, Sarah Walton. I live in Central Beaverton.
Nathan.
Hey, everyone. Good to see you again. Nathan here for Raleigh West. Glad to be back.
And Paula.
Hello, I'm up north in Cedar Mills. Nice to see y'all.
Paige.
Hi everyone, Paige Lerwick, and I am a Bose resident.
Scott.
Yeah, Scott Winter, Raleigh West Planning Commission. I'm not sure where my screen is, but.
And Kelly, finally. I don't know.
Yeah, you already got her.
Oh, I did get her? Okay.
Yeah, she moved down.
Disappeared and reappeared.
Yeah.
And I think that's everybody that I've got on my list. Visitor comments is next on the agenda.
I don't see anybody that is not either invited or is a part of our advisory committee. So I think we have
Scott is now upside down.
Yeah, I have a laptop with a mind of its own.
Oh, there you go. So no one. Okay, so next up is the Downtown Equity Strategy presentation from Rachel and Cadence. Take it away.
All right. Hi. So I'm flying solo tonight. Cadence wasn't able to join us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And I'll just say I was at your last meeting, which was kind of our first stop on our roadshow for some of these initial community meetings to introduce this project. And I just want to first thank you all for the feedback you provided, especially some of the framing of the questions that we had. It was really helpful. This was kind of our first run through of this, and we incorporated a lot of your feedback as we presented to other groups. So first of all, thank you for that. I don't want to repeat everything that I said last time. So the purpose of coming to you today is to just do a quick overview for those of you who weren't here, and then share with you what has been updated since we last spoke. Hopefully you all saw our draft project charter, and I'd love to get any feedback on that. And then, I think where we're at right now in the project is just making sure we have the right scope of work so that we can go out for RFP and get a consultant group. So just very interested in any feedback you have that will help us really shape the grain of the project as we move forward. Next slide, please, Chase. Just kidding. Okay, so I joke. Okay, so essentially, we see a real opportunity here. Bureau is poised to spend millions of dollars in downtown Beaverton, and lots of opportunity. Even with the current moment, we know that there's going to be a lot of big changes in downtown Beaverton that are very exciting. But we want to make sure that those changes work for everyone in our community, and that we end up with a downtown Beaverton that is really reflective of our diverse community. And really feels like it belongs to everyone. So, we aren't trying to create an exclusive place with all of these investments. We want to create a downtown for all. So this will be really a framework for spending these public resources. And we, ultimately want to make sure that downtown is an accessible place for people of all backgrounds. We're really looking to center our BIPOC community in this effort so that we're preventing displacement, in some cases mitigating it when it does occur. And so this is really an action-oriented piece of work where we're looking to provide the most benefit with the least negative consequences using a racial equity lens. And some of you may be more steeped in what a racial equity lens is than others. And so I thought I would just take a moment here and just talk a little bit about why we lead with race. And hopefully you've all seen the city's adopted diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, which was last updated and adopted by City Council in 2019. And that document really stated that we do use race as a primary lens of this work. And that's really because we have a legacy of institutional racism, not only nationally, but in our community. And unfortunately, there are still some pretty major disparities in our community where, race is still a predictor of worse outcomes. And so we know that we have work to do. And so I like this definition of racial equity, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. This is a definition from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity called GARE. So it's when race can no longer be used to predict life outcomes, and life outcomes for all groups are improved. So using a racial equity lens really means, asking these fundamental questions to understand how do these proposed projects impact, who's impacted by these projects? How are we engaging with them? And how are we shaping our work so that we are proactively eliminating some of these racial disparities that exist in our community? So just as a refresher, the three big things we're looking to do with the downtown equity strategy is to focus on displacement prevention and mitigation. So we're looking to develop a new set of policies and strategies and tools that will help us avoid involuntary displacement, both of businesses and of residents. The second one is this proactive piece about creating this inclusive downtown. So what are the policies, strategies, and tools we can use to create affordable housing and to bring in businesses and retain businesses and amenities that want to stay in downtown. And then updating our decision-making processes. So really institutionalizing and kind of standardizing how we do community engagement and use a racial equity lens. Right now we have some divisions within the city that are starting to utilize these tools, but we don't have this as a standard across the board. And so we're really looking to apply this for any project that has to do with redevelopment or development and infrastructure. So this wouldn't have to do with, we're not looking at this point to take this citywide with, any kind of, operations or city hiring practices or the police or the library. This specific project is focused on redevelopment and infrastructure in the downtown area. Speaking of which, we have updated this project map since last we came to you. We have, it used to, so basically this encompasses the urban renewal boundary area as well as the Allen Boulevard corridor. And we decided to kind of square this area off to Murray. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here. Oops. Oh my gosh. Going off the rails. Okay, so we decided to include this area that was more residential because, you know, after getting feedback from you all and some of the other community groups that we've met with so far, that that just suggested that you know, there is a lot of naturally occurring low-income housing in this area, and that this area could be impacted by some of the development that occurs within the urban renewal area. So we decided to include it in our boundary in this draft document. So just kind of where we're at right now, we presented to Bureau, which was our kind of official public meeting on September 22nd, and have met with some of the existing community advisory bodies, such as the Diversity Advisory Board, you guys, HTAG, and our Central Beaverton NAC. And we are now finalizing some outreach pieces that will be, we're going to do a mail piece that's going out to all the residents and businesses in that project area, as well as starting to contact community organizations and houses of worship in this area to get the word out that this is a project that we're starting, and we're looking for some initial feedback. And then kind of really what we're looking for is to get initial feedback, make sure we're on the right track before we hire a consultant team who will really help us develop those strategies and tools. So we're really looking, once we have a team on board, to really doing some very extensive community engagement. But right now we felt like before we even do that, we do want to let folks know that this is a project that's coming up, and give people an opportunity to stay connected and give us some initial feedback. So I would love to know from you all, if you were able to take a peek at our draft project charter, if you have any feedback that you think that that we should consider, or anything that needs to be changed, or anything we may have left out as we start kind of refining what this is. I'd also love to know if, you know, who else you think we should be speaking with at this point, and any additional questions we should be asking. So I'm going to pull up my big screen and see if I can see you all. Sometimes it's hard to do that and drive a presentation, but I think I got it. So does anyone have any feedback on the charter, if you were able to read that? You love it.
I guess you'll just have to start calling on people, Rich.
Oh, you know. Is Rebecca, are you talking?
Yeah.
No, okay. All right. I know you guys saw this presentation before. So, you know, not much has changed in our kind of initial, those three big things that we're looking to do, you know, the displacement prevention, creation of this inclusive downtown piece, and then kind of changing some of our internal city practices. But if there's something else that you feel like should definitely be on that list, you know, we'd love to hear it.
I think we incorporated a lot of our suggestions from last time, so I appreciate that.
Great. I have a question, and this is maybe an unfair question for you, but I was just sort of curious. You talked about sort of the systemic racism sort of concept, and you said some areas have sort of like taken the sort of definition of diversity and sort of done maybe more work with it. And you said, you know, the other areas. What are some parts that you think are leading? I'm just curious, sort of within the government, some of the areas that you feel like are sort of taking it and running with it.
I think what I was referring to is like different divisions within City of Beaverton. Yeah, I think, well, Rob's project is next. And I think he's going to talk a little bit about this. I know the planning division has been starting to, or really been using a racial equity toolkit already, which is really exciting. And then I think that our, you know, the development division, the 5-year housing action plan, and some of the housing work has been looking at you know, using some racial equity toolkits as well. So I think that's exciting. It's a great start. But I think across the board, whether we're talking about, you know, my division's economic development, we we're recruiting restaurants to downtown. We're not using anything like that. You know, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to grow here. You know, transportation planning, we've got a lot of infrastructure projects coming up. You know, I think it's important that we're you know, approaching this work with a similar framework, and you know, really looking at like who's impacted by this project. How are we talking to them? What else should we be considering? You know, who's at the table, that kind of thing. So I think I actually don't know a ton about Rob's work, so I'm definitely staying on for that to hear more about what he's doing. But I think that I guess my point is that it's a little uneven at this point about which kind of divisions are starting to do that. I think we've recognized that we need to kind of work together and standardize this across CDD and hopefully the city of Beaverton as a whole.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, Rachel?
Yeah.
I apologize if I'm giving feedback through my system while I'm talking. I remember last time we had a discussion about the boundaries, the purple and the yellow lines here. The yellow lines are set, right? They're not changeable. Whoops.
Sorry about that. Oh my gosh. All right. Yes, so this is the urban renewal district, and it's a little bit confusing because this sort of purple line to the north is also that urban renewal district. So this is set. So for the purpose of this project, we took that and added this piece south. I know some of the feedback you gave us last time was also potentially include some of this northern part of Center Street. And we've also heard that from some other groups, and I will actually be updating this map to include, you know, just the part of that's within the city of Beaverton. I think the Washington County line is like right around here, but we know there is some housing kind of right along this Center Street area as well.
Rachel, did you get any feedback on this area just off of 217 and BH Highway? I think it's like, I don't know what name, some of those names of those streets are in there. A little residential neighborhood, and there's some apartments out on 5th, kind of in here someplace.
You know, that
did you get any
hasn't come
feedback?
up. No, not that I'm aware of. I'll definitely look back through my notes, but that hasn't come up. Chase, have you heard of anything along those lines? No? Okay. Is that something that we should kind of take a closer look at, you think?
You know, just looking at the map tonight, you know, and letting you present, it seems like it's one of those areas that's kind of left behind. I used to know more about this neighborhood, but not recently, and it's kind of cut off because of 217 and BH. You have industrial that's kind of in here and across the street. It may be something just to take a look at, and I don't know, maybe your ACT members, if you know anything about this, it kind of acts as a cut through as well. You come off of the freeway and you cut through the neighborhood over to 5th and into the industrial area to avoid all this. So it may be something to think about.
I would agree that it should be included. Back when I worked in an office before the shutdown, I walked that area a lot during lunch, and it would seem to be something that actually could and should be tied in rather than kind of cut out. So bringing the purple line down Beaverton Hillsdale all the way to the vertical line, I think would make sense to incorporate that area.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I think it's I use it as a cut through myself to get to Home Depot for my house, but it's a nice little neighborhood. I think Larch Street, and I can't remember the other name of the street, but no, I think that makes sense.
Great. You may also notice, or maybe this was just a hilarious internal note, these lines used to be thick and red, but we thought that presenting a red line map was not fully appropriate with this topic here. So it's now purple, which is great. So, so that has been fixed. Look forward to fixing all kinds of other things. That's great. Okay, good. Good to know. Well, good. Well, if anyone has feedback on the project charter, you know, there's absolutely still time to let me know if you haven't had a chance to read that through. We, you know, always really appreciate your feedback. I will just say kind of next steps here. We are going to be sticking this up on a web page in the next couple of days, and getting this initial community engagement plan together, which includes doing a postcard mailer to folks in this project area, as well as some engagement with community organizations, just to let them know, hey, we're putting this project together. Do we have the right project? We will be going for a supplemental budget request. Going to be doing some racial equity training for our project team, and then really drafting an RFP to find a consultant team who can help lead this work over the next 12 to 18 months. And then one thing we'll be doing, I know Cadence did her housing talks with City Council about 1.5 years ago, and those were really successful. Just some roundtables talking about kind of giving a lay of the land of affordable housing, and explaining policies and how that could look like in Beaverton. So we're looking to do a similar thing with council starting in January that we're kind of calling equity talks at this point. So that's kind of what's next. And we'd love to update you out in a couple months when we have more to share, maybe with the consultant RFP.
Awesome.
Great.
Rachel, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rachel,
Yes.
One of your bullet points, did you have, if my memory serves me, on a question or discussion topic on if there's any suggestions on what groups or who to reach out to? Did you have something like that?
I did. Let's see, I'll try to stop turning off my presentation here. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to give the group a quick chance to weigh in on that, just because we have such a wide range of folks. Any suggestions to add to what Rachel may have touched on already?
This would be a hard group to reach, Rachel, and I recognize that. But in addition to talking to groups who are here now, residents, business owners, whichever families, that sort of thing, if we have a way to determine business owners who have left, particularly if they were small family-owned or minority-owned businesses, to find out what could have kept them here, what could have helped make them successful, it might be good to find out from people no longer here where we were lacking, as opposed to just aspirational things from people who are here now. It's a hard group to reach, but it might provide some valuable insight.
That's great. Thanks, Ann. Is there anyone in particular that comes to mind, or feel free to shoot me an email if something, if there's anyone specific that you know of that we should reach out to.
Okay.
Great.
Rachel, this is Alan. The Beaverton Chamber, Mike Luton, keeps in contact with all the small business owners, and they actually keep reasons why people left the chamber, for instance. So they have all those connections already, and it's Mike Luton is probably the lead on that.
Great, thank you. Excellent. Well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate your time. I'll put my email in the chat in case anyone thinks of anything that they'd like to reach out about. If not, Tyler definitely knows how to get a hold of me. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you.
So up next, we have our housing options project presentation with Rob. And Scott is still upside down.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to change till I'm done.
I love it. Keep it.
And as Rob sets up here, maybe I'll do a quick introduction since he already gave his introduction of himself. But I would like to maybe pad that a little bit. Rob actually started with the city as doing some intern work for us and doing inventory work of our downtown and kind of compiling all the information and giving a report of kind of needs analysis or what we have and what we don't have, and that spun into a position, and that he has now been able to move our planning folks kind of in directions we've never gone before. And it's really exciting to have a lens that Rob and a couple of other of his colleagues are taking that on a variety of projects. I'm actually really proud that we've got Rob here tonight to talk about HOP, and he'll go into what the Housing Options Project is all about. But this is kind of a new territory for the city of, the state coming and saying, hey, we need to provide housing for all, and ways of looking at our land use types throughout our community. So this project isn't just necessarily about downtown, it's about our entire community. And a lot of you live not just in downtown, you're our community. And so I wanted to invite Rob in because I told him that you're an awesome group to be able to ask him lots of difficult questions. So I'm going to hold you to it. And hopefully you find ways to participate in his project. So Rob, thanks for coming tonight. You've got a couple babies at home, probably wish that you were spending time with and not with us, but we really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, actually, I was with them from 5:30 to 7, and they go to bed at 7. So this is perfect. So you can hear me then? I was having trouble unmuting before. Okay. Well, thanks for that intro, Tyler. As many of you know, this is one of many housing projects that the city is working on to meet the goals in the Housing 5-Year Action Plan. And put simply, this project is considering where and how we will allow additional housing types in all the city's residential areas. That includes duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters, and accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. So tonight I will give you a little bit about the project background, and then I will talk to you about what we've been doing with some of the racial equity work. There might be a little bit of overlap with Rachel's presentation. And then we can talk about neighborhood patterns we've discussed. And actually I want to check one thing. Okay, I'm terribly sorry, but I just realized it's the old presentation. And the agenda is out of order. I want to pull up, we got some feedback last week and just changed it. So I'm not sure how that happened, but.
No problem.
I think someone should be nominated to be upside down for every meeting. We can rotate,
Then I nominate Paula to be upside down for November. How's that?
I've always been a bit of a trendsetter.
You really are, Scott.
Okay, so we are back. Thankfully, that was fast. Okay. Is this still? Okay. Okay. So the goals of the project are really to allow more diverse housing types and sizes throughout the city, to support more aging in place options for people that want to stay in their neighborhood, promote flexibility for property owners that want to do more things with their home, and assist with affordability by allowing more units and smaller units in existing neighborhoods, improving homeownership opportunities, and advancing racial equity. I realize that's a pretty long list. So what we're trying to do by advancing racial equity is making housing practices more equitable by allowing housing types that meet the needs of large families and multi-generational families across neighborhoods in Beaverton. We also want to create opportunities for people to live in neighborhoods of choice, and I will talk more about that later, and also minimize residential displacement. Our goals for the project are to come up with a housing option strategy that determines where and how additional housing types could be allowed in residential areas, to update our development code, and then come up with an implementation plan for next steps. This is our schedule. We started the project in fall 2018, and we presented the project to about 30 public meetings. We're now working on alternatives, but we are moving forward slowly since the state is still in the process of rulemaking. We probably won't have final guidance on that until November. At that point, we'll develop alternatives and then conduct additional engagement, refine those alternatives before moving into development code and mapping changes. I don't know how familiar everybody is with House Bill 2001, if you've talked about it before, but I'll just keep it brief and say that in 2019, the state updated their housing law to essentially end single-family zoning. The law requires cities to allow a mix of housing types in all neighborhoods. What we know now is that a duplex would be allowed on every lot where a single-family home could be built, and the other housing types would be allowed in every area where single-family housing is allowed. Area is something the state is still defining, and that's something we would have more guidance on in November.
Rob, could I ask a definitional question?
Sure.
I'm always trying to promote the use and development of tiny homes, tiny houses. When you're saying cottage clusters here, would a cottage be a tiny house, or is that something else?
It actually would be something else, because the state came up, in the state law, they came up with a definition of cottage clusters. And I think it's still being refined, but I think there are square footage requirements. I forget them exactly, but they would probably be like 800 to 1,000 square feet, whereas a tiny home is typically 400 square feet.
400, right.
Yeah, so it is possible that that could come up and we would find ways to allow tiny homes. I know there are definitely issues with the state building code on those issues.
Yeah, I'm sure codes would have to change. I see tiny homes as an option for people to move into home ownership and then gradually move up to something larger perhaps. So I would hope that tiny homes would not be forgotten as an option within this larger plan.
And that's something, it's not covered by the state law. It doesn't mean we can't do it. If anything, it means there's more flexibility over how we can do it. And these are just incredibly high-level draft approaches, but this is what the state's working on now. And they're coming up with 5 potential pathways for how we might be able to move forward and allow housing types. Option 1 is your more traditional minimum lot size approach, where the minimum lot size for each zoning district would be the same for all housing types. So in an R7 zone, 7,000 square feet is required for a single family home. It would also be required for duplexes, triplexes, etc. Some cities scale. This approach would not scale lot sizes. The model code approach pretty much says that all housing types are allowed everywhere, on every lot. And the performance metric approach would give a threshold for each type. So you might say, for example, triplexes would be on 80% of lots, and this is in all residential zones, and the other types would have lower percentages. There's also a master plan approach, which is the least developed, so I expect it to change a lot in the last month, but the takeaway would be that if you could meet 15 units per acre, then that might work. Ironically, I think that might be lower density than some of the other options. And then the 5th one, they're still figuring out, but it would be a pathway for people to create design standards.
Was this modeled after any other cities, or are there any cities that you know of that have done the same type of bill for housing?
So I know Minneapolis got a lot of attention last year, and they were the first, I would say, maybe high profile city. I mean, I tend to think of Minneapolis as the first city doing this, but I do know other people are looking at middle housing on a smaller scale. But Oregon is the first state, so that's different. And you know, with a city, you have the opportunity to maybe refine your approach based on your existing built environment. But with a state level approach, they're their model code is one model code that would apply. They've got a model code for large cities and a model code for medium cities. And beyond that, there's not a lot of differentiation.
What about, it kind of doesn't matter here, but what about in the more rural parts?
So there are thresholds for, I don't know the exact size, but the smallest rural communities are not required to comply with this. But it does affect, I think, most towns and cities in the entire Portland metro region. So now I will start to talk about our racial equity work. We're still in the early stages of this process. The project started in 2018, but we started the racial equity work 1 or 2 months ago. In a perfect world, you start in the beginning like Rachel's doing. So it's exciting to see someone start in the very beginning with the project. It always has been a goal of the project, but I wouldn't say we had the framework to pursue it like we're doing right now. So I think Rachel briefly mentioned the GARE Racial Equity Toolkit, which is also what we are using. And I'll just say the way it's organized that there are 6 main steps where we've completed the first steps. We've taken a look at the desired results and outcomes, and we've looked at what data we have, what data we need, and come up with a plan for how to get missing data. And then we're still in the middle of community engagement and analysis and strategies, which is dependent upon rulemaking for the state ending in November. Also, I think we heard a little bit about leading with race report. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because their leading with race report is more of a regional look at data, and we're going to be looking at a small neighborhood level. But I do like to recognize the diversity that's in the city, and we know that 1 out of 3 people in Central and East Beaverton are a person of color, and even it goes as high as 1 and 2 in West Beaverton and Aloha. So moving forward, I like to revisit this a lot. But I also want to mention that if people are looking at the Leading with Race report and they're looking at some of these findings, there might be some differences that I'd like to point out. And that's because we're looking at the census block group level. I don't know how familiar you are looking at census maps, but census blocks are typically about 600 to 3,000 people. And the reason we use it is because it allows us to look more closely at racial segregation in neighborhoods. But at that level of detail, we start to lose some racial differences. We don't quite get the nuance that's captured in the Leading with Race report. So one of the things we were looking at is trying to figure out, knowing that HB 2001 was going to affect single family neighborhoods the most, we wanted to look at racial demographics in these neighborhoods and then compare them to neighborhoods that allow a mix of housing types. And what we found was that neighborhoods with single family detached zoning was, they are significantly white, 84% compared to white people in multifamily neighborhoods, which is 67%. We also found that Latinos are 4 times more likely to live in neighborhoods zoned for multifamily housing than they would be in a typically single family neighborhood. And communities of color that are Black, multiracial, or identify as some other race based on census reporting are less likely to live in neighborhoods zoned for single family only when compared to Asians, Native Americans, and Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders. We then wanted to look at housing tenure in each neighborhood, in other words, who owns and who rents, and compare these patterns in neighborhoods, again, that are mostly single family with those that are mostly multifamily. This information tells us that the people that live in these neighborhoods are more likely to own their homes, providing long-term financial security through the ability to build equity in their homes and also share this wealth with future generations. And what we found was that detached single-family neighborhoods provide more home ownership opportunities, which is intuitive. But the next point was interesting too, and that's that white people own 90% of owner-occupied housing in neighborhoods zoned for detached single-family homes, and 80% of renter-occupied housing in these neighborhoods. And similar to what we saw on the previous screen, Black and Latino householders and people that identify as some other race alone were more likely to live in rental housing in multifamily neighborhoods. Another topic that we're just starting to scratch the surface on are looking at our design and development standards. To start, it helps to remember that throughout the beginning of the 20th century is when many people were leaving cities and setting up in suburbs. I'm not going to get into that story tonight, but I would keep in mind that the design standards for suburban neighborhoods were often a direct response to urban stereotypes at the time and how they could avoid the conditions that were currently happening in cities. For example, we can take a brief look at gardens and front yards. In mid-century lawns in single-family neighborhoods, front lawns were supposed to be designed for recreation and leisure, and restrictions on the locations of gardens were used to reinforce differences between white yards and working class yards. For example, if you had a garden in your front yard, it was a sign that you may not be able to afford food. It was well known back at mid-century homes where working class or immigrants lived that they would gardens because it would offset their cost for groceries. And as exclusive neighborhoods started to emerge, cities would start to regulate where they could be located because they wanted to distance themselves from neighborhoods that looked like they had working class or immigrant families recently moving in. That brings us to some research we've also been doing into neighborhood patterns. Along with the Racial Equity Toolkit, we wanted to figure out what neighborhoods look like before we come up with solutions, as well as to explore the feasibility of adding certain housing types to these neighborhoods. So we analyzed all residential areas and then classified them into 3 distinct development periods. I don't know if you can read the map, see the font on there, but in the red zone, we have homes built before 1964. And then in the orange zone, homes built between 65 and 1984. And the green zone is 3 of 4 houses built between 1985 and 2004. In all of these areas, between 75 to 80% of homes were built in that time period. So there's a lot of consistency in the design patterns as you move across the city. You'll notice there is no pattern for homes built after 2005 because the city was mostly built out and that would be residential infill. To provide some context for these changes, it helps to review some key dates in the city's history. What a lot of people don't know, and this surprised me too, but in 1946 is when we had our first zoning ordinance. And at that point in time, all housing types were allowed in all residential districts. It wasn't until 1960 that 4 new zoning districts were created and the city created the first single family district. And this marks the beginning of starting to separate single family and multifamily homes in the city. Sometimes I hear at meetings that people would like to go back to the way things were, but I think sometimes that means the way it was in the 60s and 70s, because from 1900 to 1960, all of these housing types were built in the same neighborhood. And we can see it in areas like Old Town and Central Beaverton. And so that for general takeaways is that the big idea is that as you're looking at development moving from east to west, like a pendulum swinging across the city, houses get bigger, lot sizes get smaller, and neighborhoods become less diverse in terms of racial groups and housing types. And this might have implications for the feasibility of building certain housing types in certain areas. But more important, it was these findings that prompted us to look closer into how development patterns might perpetuate present day trends, such as racial segregation patterns. And I'll talk more about that on the next 2 slides. So I mentioned earlier that in 1960, the first single family zoning district was created. In 1978 is really where there's the biggest shift, because that's when 8 new zones were created, and 5 of those 8 zones were reserved for single-family detached homes only. That's where we see the most extreme separation between single-family and multifamily homes. And if you look at building activity after 1980, that's really where you're just seeing mostly single-family detached homes being built, and very few other housing types are built. And if you compare the development patterns in this area, again, these are homes built between 65 and 84, with the map that we were looking at before, the racial segregation map, you can see that they do correspond in that the area in the pinkish purple boundary is where we have mostly white, higher income and higher wealth opportunities. Current research does show that children who grow up in these areas are more likely to have improved educational and professional outcomes. And one way to think about adding more housing options throughout the city would be to think about how we can allow a range of housing types in areas such as these and improve outcomes for children who could grow up in this neighborhood who otherwise might not have had the opportunity to do so. I'll tell you a little bit about what we've heard so far from meetings so far. From general feedback, I'm thinking of common themes across the board from our open houses, our surveys, our NACs. We've heard a pretty strong request for more multi-generational living options, as well as more accessible homes. Those two come up quite a bit, as well as more home ownership opportunities. We've heard people ask for more homes near transit, market, and shopping areas. We've heard some concerns about loss of trees and open space, and mixed opinions on design compatibility, meaning whether new homes should match the size and scale of homes in the neighborhood. And we've also heard mixed opinions about the need for more or less parking. We hear just as many people say they want more parking as people who want less parking. For multicultural engagement, these are themes that are unique to some of the groups we've talked to so far. There's a lot more we can be doing, but we've heard a request for more duplexes or housing types that support units with 3 or 4 bedrooms for larger families, more housing types with common rooms or community buildings for family gatherings, more housing options near schools, parks, and houses of worship, which is a little different than what we heard from general feedback. We consistently heard a request for more parking. We didn't really hear anyone ask for less parking in these meetings. And again, just a reminder that the common themes were housing affordability, homeownership opportunities, accessible homes, and multi-generational. That's pretty much what everyone agreed with. Going forward, we're trying to think about who else we need to talk to. And based on housing disparities, population size, and our research findings, we've come up with the following list. This is certainly not a complete list, but it's where we'd like to start. And we've come up with Latino, Black or African American, Native American, Middle Eastern and North African, Filipino, Vietnamese, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, and people who have mobility issues. In terms of next steps, I mentioned before we've completed the first 2 steps of the Racial Equity Toolkit. We need to be working on the middle and the end. And we'll be meeting with City Council for direction in a couple of weeks, and then we'll start working on alternative strategies. We really have to wait until November to figure out how rulemaking concludes, because it could really go in a few different options. It could go in a few different directions, and we're not sure what pathways would be available. But once we have more clarity on that, we would then perform an economic analysis to evaluate capacity, affordability, and potential displacement. So that's it. If you have any general questions or comments about the project, I'd love to hear them. I know you're thinking about the downtown equity strategy too. So if you're starting to think about how these projects might fit together, I'd love to hear about that, or any other housing considerations you think might be important.
question, Rob. How much flexibility does the city have relative, or does any city have relative to the rules the state puts down?
The flexibility would be, it's limited for sure. And I can go back, might be easier to have the slide in front of us. Oops, sorry. So with the model code, that's essentially for people who either don't have the capacity to do the work, and you can't change that. You just have to accept it exactly as it is. And then with minimum compliance, there's not as much for options 1, 3, and 4. And when we started this project about 6 months before we started hearing like whispers of House Bill 2001. So we're able to establish a foundation and talk to people about where they might want housing. But that starts to shift as this housing law is taking place, because the thresholds are so high that I don't know how much it will matter if we have to allow it in most locations.
Gotcha. So the city is going to lay down essentially minimum standards, and Beaverton, I'm sorry, the state's going to lay down minimum standards, and the city could put things on top of that, or I guess
we could build off minimum compliance as a starting point, and they could say, this is the bottom floor. You have to do everything in here. But if you do that, there might be a way to combine the minimum compliance section with, you know, like option 3 or 5. There might be a hybrid approach.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Sure.
Rob, do our codes allow within the downtown area or places, say along Allen, where we have small businesses, for people to live above or behind their shops?
I think so this code looks at residential zones only. And I think the places where people would be living above shops would be in more commercial and mixed use zones, which would technically be outside of this project. I haven't looked closely at the development. I'm a long range planner, just for background. So I tend to get one project and then drill down on this.
Well, you were talking about the intersection between the business, the first project we looked at, which is urban renewal, and this residential, and that would seem to me to be an area that I haven't heard discussed as an option that would combine business and some residents for a different approach.
I think I would assume it probably, in the residential areas, it might not, but it's not impossible. But I think there are commercial and mixed use codes usually facilitate that mixing more. So, I mean, one option might be, and I haven't spoken to anyone about this, but just theoretically, you know, you could look at, you know, could more land use be dedicated to options that support that arrangement?
I have a question. This is Paula. Hi, Rob.
Hi.
I'm curious as to what the approach is around some of our planned communities where you have to plan to get gas because the gas station isn't 2 blocks from your house. You have to, it's going to be 1.5 miles down the road. So don't be going in on fumes kind of thing. So if we overburden a particular area or district with additional population, but there isn't more room to provide services to support that population. I mean, that's what I'm wondering about. And I'm thinking of some of those sort of landlocked areas like the Allen and Murray, you know, intersection where, you know, you've got the Safeway and the Papa Murphy's and the gas station and the sort of like the get through life liquor store. Let's not forget that. But there's, you know, how much can that area really take on if we were going to increase the population density from a services point of view? Is there any discussion around that? Because Beaverton had a whole phase of planning, right? In the 60s, 70s, late 60s, I guess, to the 70s, where they put these communities in that were kind of wrapped around with like bike paths and safe places for kids to play and move around on their own. And then the services were out. And they forecasted a certain density around that. And I think it's worked out okay. But now I'm wondering what that means if we're going to increase that density.
I think that would be, you know, something I've heard from some people is that if we could increase density in certain areas, then we could support the need for more shops and restaurants in those areas. But without that density, we're not going to get it. So I think one of them has to come first. I know I'm not working closely on this project, but that's a project that we're hearing a lot with Cooper Mountain and South Cooper Mountain. Among all the new housing is going
All
in.
right, yeah, there's a lot down there for sure.
Yeah, and people are not necessarily opposed to it, but they're saying, okay, you're putting all this housing, but we need more services. And then we'll hear from, you know, developers or transit that people need to be there before they have the services. So, I mean, one of them has to go first. And that will be, I mean, this would apply to those areas as well. They might have extra conditions based on Metro's requirements from the UG expansion, but this would apply to that as well.
And is there any concerns around, this sounds boohooish, but around liability? So if someone bought a house thinking that their house would be worth a certain amount based on the environment they're in and the population density, and now there's a duplex next door and apartments across the street, but when they bought the house, it was, you know, single family, that kind of stuff, and it ends up devaluing their house, their investment. Is there any concern around that? Has anybody been looking into that?
There have been, it's a concern I've heard people say. I haven't heard of, you know, like an economic inquiry into what that might look like. But it would be something I can look into. I mean, that's going to keep coming up. But
especially for the older folks, so this is their retirement, right? Is it's their house, they're going to sell it and then go to assisted care or whatever. I'm thinking about my parents or whatever. So it's, you know, it's kind of these kinds of things that can hit these unintended consequences, and what does that look like?
And I mean, I've heard some people say the opposite too, that it might increase the value, but it would be nice to see, you know, some evidence of where this is coming from. But you know, like I mentioned earlier, this is it's never happened in a state before. So sometimes
uncharted territory for sure.
Yeah, we look to see what people are doing, but we're kind of at the forefront of this. So I'm not sure what we'll find.
Yeah, it's wild. We're the Wild West though, so why not?
So I have a question. Where do opportunities for removing or reducing SDCs and things like that, so that people can actually develop?
Sorry, I'm going to switch off my headphones. It's really hard to hear. Where they can actually be doing things to develop their properties. I mean, most of this team here knows I live right in Old Town. I have a half an acre right in downtown. I'm by the Versa and La Scala and Barcelona. And, you know, we're zoned, we're mixed use, we're zoned. But, you know, there's disincentives to do anything with our property. If I want to put a ADU on my property, I got to pay $25,000 to connect into sewer. So where does that fall into this? Because that makes building additional housing difficult for anyone except people who have a crap ton of money to do it with, right? So, you know, whether you're talking about small houses, like Ann said, or you're talking about, you know, a duplex on my property, I'm not in a position, you know, I'm not a developer, but I have a lot of property and could create additional housing that's in a really highly sought after neighborhood right now. And so I'm just wondering how does that come together with that?
So that's something that up until this point has not been a part of this project, but there might be a way that it comes into it later. And part of that part of that is because when we started the project, we were looking at changing the development code because that's what we can control in the city of Beaverton. And, you know, SDCs, as you might know, are influenced by all of the special districts. So it's not something, it's an important conversation. It's not something we can fix through this project, but it is something that we're hearing from other people. I have heard we might have to revisit its relationship to this project. But I think it would be like a parallel effort. It's not going to change through this round. We also, something I didn't mention is that the state has a June 2022 deadline for us to choose one of these options and get everything approved, which might sound far away, but it's also kind of fast. And if we didn't do anything, then the model code kicks in June 2022. And so, yeah, it's a pretty fast timeline.
Rob, I've got a question, and probably can talk about this offline, but same time, I think with Vanessa's question with SDCs, Paul's question with, you know, density and kind of maximizing areas from maybe a traffic perspective. What about utilities, and how do we look at utilities and water's pipes are sized correctly, sewer pipes are sized correctly, you know, the transportation system? How are we approaching looking at those infrastructure pieces with this?
So there is there's something in the state in this state law that deals with infrastructure that says if a city feels like they don't have the adequate infrastructure, then they could apply for a request to extend the timeline. But paired with that request must be an action plan. So you couldn't say, oh, we can't do it. You'd have to say, well, we can't do it for reasons A, B, and C. We're going to fix it in this timeline and move forward. So infrastructure, cities don't have a lot of flexibility with using infrastructure as a reason to not allow it in a certain area. And then transportation, there's exact language in there about it, but it really can't be a consideration, which counters how we've been doing this for a long time. But it's saying, you know, I know there's something called a transportation-based planning rule, where if you're doing something like this, you would normally have to then take a closer look at your transportation system. But the state law specifically says that doesn't apply. You can just allow the housing types everywhere. We did a long time ago, I think it was like late 2019, we did meet with our city services team, and we had a conversation saying, are you worried about infrastructure? Do you think we need to have a plan for this? And there wasn't any major concern. So we dropped it. And the fact that the action plan itself is pretty aggressive means there's really no avoiding it.
Well, the one comment I just add, just going back to the traffic, is we're already known for our traffic. Like, yay, us. So, you know, as we're trying to redevelop Beaverton and draw people to come here from outside different areas in the city, I think that's something else where the different communities should probably be working together to make sure that we're not killing one person's mission because we're trying to succeed over here, and just being really strategic about how we accomplish all these different visions that we have for the city, and not clobber one over the other, at least without knowing it, right? If you know you're going to do it, that's one thing. If you accidentally pull the rug out from your comrade, that's not a good thing.
You know, I don't know how similar the situation of Minneapolis to the Portland region would be, but considering they changed their zoning about a year before us, there was a report that came out about a month ago saying that they've had very few building permits. And so people thought it was like this radical change. It is radical, but the applications didn't come in. And people were saying, well, zoning is one piece of this puzzle. But like people said, I mean, SDCs, other costs, it's not enough to change zoning. We're not going to see significant activity if we don't take more of a big picture approach to what's stopping people from building these housing types. No, that makes me wonder about traffic. I mean, there might be localized impacts, but I don't know if we're really going to see mass development.
I have a question. You talked about like home. First of all, this was awesome. I really appreciate it. I think as a resident, it's interesting to see. I'm sort of curious about if it's sort of like a path to home ownership felt like sort of a consistent theme that you guys had identified. And I don't know, but I feel like there sort of used to be like a rent to own sort of lending practice or something. Is there anything that the state or the city are thinking about from a like lending, working with sort of banks and stuff on sort of rent to own sort of systems or process, or even with sort of local developers or investors? I mean, maybe that's crazy, but I felt like maybe there used to be something.
I don't know. I love that idea. I would probably want to kick it back to Tyler. I don't know, because I would think it might come out of the development division if it were. I haven't heard of anything with planning.
Yeah.
But
yeah, just to follow up. Yeah, there's a handful of those types of programs, Sarah. And Javier Mena is kind of our go-to person. One of the things that we've kind of talked about here, in fact, recently, is getting to our local banks and coming up with action items of how do we start moving the ball forward in these programs. Proud Ground is an excellent example out here in Washington County, in which they help buy the land and then you rent that back from them over time. So there's kind of a minimal middle person involved, but we can have Javier, when his next time he comes through, he can give us a little bit more information, or I'll send an email from him responding to that.
Well, and I sort of had a question with like a duplex, like buying one of the duplex units feels like sort of like maybe a easier path to ownership, but like if it's on one taxable lot, can they be sold separately?
I mean, that's what a townhouse can operate by. Townhouse can operate by that model.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you can condoize those. Yeah, but if it, like you said, if it was a duplex on a single lot, I believe then that's the same ownership of that duplex. But there may be some things to be thinking about, like a condo scenario. Chase and I were talking about condos and townhouses earlier today, and what are those rules and regulations around those two?
Yeah, I mean, I just think again, it's sort of in the sort of changes of the policy and stuff around sort of adding more types of housing. It's sort of like a good time to think about sort of creating accessibility and affordability to those types of housing. Even if somebody could purchase one unit, that's still probably, better than renting that unit if they're sort of able to do that. So I was just curious.
Yep, good thoughts. Yeah, thank you.
Tyler, how strict am I supposed to be about the time?
I love it when we have great conversations and having, you talking to me? Come on, former chair.
Pipe in. I'll just
very strict.
Rebecca, you should be very strict.
Okay, then it's 2 minutes past. Tyler, if you'd like to cede time to continue the discussion, you may.
Yeah, thank you for asking. It sounds like we're probably starting to wind down, but let's make sure everyone gets their questions to Rob. We don't get to see him very often, like never, except for tonight. So let's make sure everyone's questions are answered.
I just have one last comment. And that's that I would consider when you're comparing to Minneapolis, consider the growth rate of the two different cities. And Minneapolis as a large, it's a twin cities, right? It's a large metropolis area as opposed to Beaverton. And just to think about that a little bit. I don't know exactly what the growth rates are between the two, but I suspect that we're higher. And so while this may not seem like a oh my God moment for us, I think we should still think about the impact of it in terms of planning.
Thank you. That's a good point.
Rob, I was just going to say, great presentation, and the quadplex that you pictured in Bose is actually right on my very block. So it, it fits in very subtly to the whole neighborhood, and I think, the whole plan makes a lot of sense. And actually, right next to it, I have a duplex as well, kind of built about probably early 50s. So no, they're both one level and fit in with all the single-family homes, and yeah, I think the whole plan makes a lot of sense.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, Rob, I'll just chime in here. I just want to say that, great presentation. I thought it was really just a data-driven analysis to see who's been living where and for how long, and it was rooted both in the history of the city and it's also shown the movement of people as well over that course of time. Well, I was definitely taken aback by some of the statistics as to what races of folks typically have the type of housing that they're in, whether it's a single-family home or they're renting. And it just it definitely opened up my eyes to see what's been happening over the course of time. I think it's one thing when you hear about it, from a different city or you read it in the paper, but when you see it drawn off of data and facts that are right here in our own city, it really, it kind of opens up your eyes to see what's been happening all these years and what opportunity is there for us to change course. So I want to thank you for putting that presentation together and backing that up with data, and then also showing what legislative opportunities are there as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, for that presentation. That was fantastic.
Okay.
And Tyler, you have like 11 minutes left. You're still muted.
Oops. So first of all, I would like to thank both Rachel and Rob for coming in tonight. I think the work that the two of you are doing together and separately are exactly where Beaverton should be in moving forward in a very progressive way. And I think the work that you're doing and going out and talking to community groups is the approach of laying the groundwork and laying the foundation to a better Beaverton. So a lot of hard work. We appreciate you. You're both welcome back anytime, and please let us know if you have any questions or things that you want to send our way. I think the final thought that I have is, the state was thinking outside the box a few years ago, as we were also kind of thinking along a similar path. And so, changing our state rules and regulations can happen, and hopefully for the better for a lot of people. And back to Sarah's question about the duplex, and I was thinking, well, shoot, if it's a condo plat, whatever, but maybe there is another way that you can take a look at it, state, and changing our rules and regulations in order to get more towards home ownership and different ways of approaches. So thank you, both of you, very much tonight.
Thank you.
All right, so I've got a few updates here as I pull this up. And Chase, if you do in a moment here, if you want to give an update on the BIRA plan and action, BIRA report and action plan after that, that'd be great. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, you can see that. So I just went ahead and highlighted some of the key things that I wanted to touch on tonight. So the PRCA and the garage still moving forward. They did have a little bit of a week and a half of being down due to the smokes from the wildfires. Alan, hopefully your crews are all back safe and snug back in their beds. I'm not sure if you were on a strike team at all that went out, but thank you to your crews and to the fire crews across the country coming to Oregon to help everybody out. Yeah, affected construction, but you know what? There's bigger things out there that we need to take care of, and so thanks and best to your crews out and about, Alan. Hyatt House Hotel continues to be on schedule. I think a lot of their work was inside, so they didn't have as much of an issue of closing down construction because they were able to do things inside. They're working on the restaurant piece of it, and Rachel is helping us out there as we try to figure out that 2,600 square feet of restaurant space. So if you know any fantastic restaurateurs who are looking to go above and beyond of where they are, or they may have hit some hard times, Rachel Thieme, that's R-A-C-H-E-L, would be happy to talk. And so we're being we're going pretty strong on trying to find the right restaurant, but it's a really difficult time for restaurants. So we're going to continue to work hard. The BC2 site, I didn't highlight, but I did on the Beaver Dam West site. BC2, that's the area near right next to Food Cartel, BG's Food Cartel, kind of to the east along Beaver Dam, Milliken, all the way over to close to Watson. And Janine continues to negotiate with UDP, and they're kind of moving around, changing some plans around, trying to fit the site just right. They had a couple of pre-application conferences to kind of dope out their thoughts. You may see on the Bureau agenda here in the next couple of months, kind of an extension to their exclusive negotiation agreement, or into their disposition development agreement. So there's pieces of it that is kind of moving forward on that front. Again, that's the 2-acre site on Beaver Dam. And then across Rose BG from the Food Cartel, that's the Beaver Dam West site. And so that was the other big project that Janine is working on. Kind of a couple big hits that are going on out there. If you've driven by, which I did, but I didn't look for some reason. There's been demolition of a couple of the buildings that were purchased in there. Carrie Floors is still there for the time being. But the northwest corner of Rose BG and Beaver Dam used to be a little 2-story building in there that is gone, in one of the pawn shops, or the pawn shop now, just the pawn shop, was recently demoed. In fact, I think today, and yeah, today. So progress is moving forward with Related and the Rebel team for that site. I see Sarah has joined us tonight, Sarah King, who has come in and was talking about the Loop project here recently, and she's also been highly involved with the Open Air Beaverton project, kind of multifaceted thing in which we were trying to help those restaurants out and opening up some parking spaces throughout the city, on street, and then also closing of First Street between Watson and Washington. And so with Rachel and Sarah, the BDA have been really working hard to provide some space for those restaurateurs. That program expires at the end of this month, but there's a lot of talk of hopefully continuing that on throughout this coming year into next year. And so the team is looking at costs involved with that, and partnerships that could evolve as well. You may, I think a little bit further on down here is the restaurant strategy team. So I'll just touch on that real quick. Hopefully you all participated in the Beaverton Restaurant Week Plus that started almost 10 days ago, right, Rachel, and finished, I think, yesterday. Is that right? Hopefully that was successful, and everyone was able to get out and support our restaurants in downtown. Going to continue on to find where my next highlight is. Here we go. The Bank of Beaverton building, that's the one that Bureau purchased at the the southeast corner of Watson and Farmington. That developer kind of put the stops down when COVID hit. But they are back at the table with a potential user in there. I believe they go to planning commission, Scott, here on the historic review and probably a design review for you to be reviewing here soon. Does that sound right?
Yep.
So the developer's still there. He's very interested in getting the right user in that space. Rachel, are they talking about doing any night market or anything? They probably can't during COVID days. Is that?
No, we're not going to be doing the night market bazaar this year. We do have some other ideas, but not in that space.
Okay, thank you. A small parcel that I don't think we have talked about much in here, and it's another piece that Vera purchased. It's at Broadway in East Street. So where Beaverton Bakery used to be, now we're affectionately calling it the Bakery Block. And then Big O's and Beaverton Pharmacy and organic, natural, what's called organic, natural, organic, what's the, Andy, what's called?
Natural grocers.
Natural grocers.
National.
That's it. Yes. So
And Big
there's that.
out of business.
Big O's has decided to leave, and Rachel will be getting all that information in response to Anne's comment earlier in the evening of if there's anything else we could have done. I think we do have some intel on that. Anyway, so that's a little corner that had been vacant for as long as I remember, and we purchased that. We were considering doing some kind of pop-up placemaking idea, but with COVID, we've decided to hold back. Yeah, but that should always be on your radar as another Vera project that could be coming at some point down the road. Another area that I have not touched on here recently, sorry, trying to get that stopped, is the Brownfields grant program. And Rachel's team and David Terrick is leading that charge. If you remember, we had a Brownfield grant program for a couple of years, and we've been able to bring that back. And there is money available for hazardous and petroleum assessments. And so it's an EPA grant. And again, if you know of any Beaverton, especially in the downtown core area, that is looking to get some assessment for environmental review, send them our way because there's only been one assessment that's been completed so far in this round, and we expect to distribute some more funding. So keep that in mind. There's the restaurant week, and then downtown design project. I'm going to go back to Scott on this. Yes, Rebecca, go ahead.
Butting in. It's 8:25. Just FYI.
Perfect. You're a great chair. Appreciate it. The downtown design project, it went to Planning Commission on September 23rd, and I'm not sure, Scott, so I'm going to turn to you, and maybe even Rob will have information. Did that get, did it have a recommendation for approval, or is that coming back to you?
I was not able to attend.
Oh, you're no help.
I don't know any more than you do.
Okay, Rob, do you know?
It is going back. I think, I don't know the date. Maybe it's tomorrow, but it is going back a second time.
Okay, I kind of figured so. I mean, it's such a big project, even though the team has been going and working with the Planning Commission and Council. It's a big deal, so it does not surprise me. And there's probably always a few things that may pop up late in those kinds of projects. They're hoping to go to Council for approval in November. And I believe that is all that I had. Whoops, I did have Downtown Beaverton Loop project that Sarah again is working on. And they've got things moving forward. They're going to be going to BIRA on October 27th for approval of the contract for the team that's led by Walker Macy. And there's a variety of folks on that, including Communitas, which Deb Myhoff will be helping out with the community engagement piece. And I know that they've had a real good, strong focus on how to do appropriate outreach with all the work that's going on and not having things lined up. But I think Chase and Rachel will be helping that team out a little bit to help guiding their life here in the next year plus probably. And then finally, Get Moving 2020. That is going to be on the November 20th ballot, just for your information. And that's for regional transportation funding. That's the Metro Council referred that measure to Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas counties. And so I'm going to stop there and give Chase an opportunity to give you a quick update on the Bureau report and action plan.
Thank you, Tyler. I just wanted to say quickly, I know there's a lot of projects going on, as you can see from this list. It seems like it grows every month. But I would highlight again just that the downtown Beaverton loop is one to really keep your eye on. Will have a significant effect and kind of be a foundation for a lot of things going forward. As far as the 2020 Bureau annual report and 5-year plan, it's coming along well. We have it now heading into design, so you all should be seeing it in the next month or so. We are going with a really great cover image this time that I'm really excited about, where we're going to be having an aerial drone shot photo for the cover. But also, in addition to that, taking a lot of your feedback previously about more photos with people in it, more less text, more images, more links to the website. So bringing that all together into somehow one document that combines two, but is still the same size as each of those. So pulling that all together, and like I said, you should be seeing it in the next month or so.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler and Chase, for that update. We now have 1 minute in which to approve the minutes from the August meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the August minutes.
Thank you, Eric. Do I hear a second?
I second.
Thank you, Paula. Everybody vote. Yes? Raise your hands. Looks approved to me.
Scott his hand's upside down, so it might be a down vote.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think we still pass.
I have to abstain. I was not at
The
the
blood's
meeting.
rushing to my head.
Fair enough.
Any other abstentions besides Anessa? Yeah, I think it was you and Dom that were not here.
It's my birthday. You guys are just always trying to have a meeting on my birthday. Can't help it.
Well, hopefully your
Fault's
trip was worth missing this amazing meeting for.
That it was, absolutely. And I'm about to leave on Wednesday again, so to the same place. So
Jealous. Okay, it is 8:30. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Is that Anessa?
you can call it.
Oh, I'm calling it. It is 8:30. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Nice
Rebecca.
job.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Night.
Hi, Kelly. Bye, Kelly.
How's how things down south, Vanessa?
They're okay. I think I told you my sister lost all her stuff, and so I was talking to her the other day, and she's struggling. You know, the combination of
Hey, Kel, do you want to stop the recording, perhaps?
Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much, Tyler.
you know, there's survivor's guilt, and you know, her house is fine and other people's house